Welcome to Exploring Entrepreneurship in the Open Internet Boom, an event hosted by the DFINITY Foundation in partnership with TechCrunch. I'm Anna Escher from the DFINITY Foundation, and I'll be your host for this event. Blockchain innovations from Bitcoin to Ethereum to the internet computer are pushing the internet into a new era. Founders are seeing opportunities on par with the dot-com boom in the 90s and mobile in the early 2000s. When business models don't rely on ads, when revenue doesn't depend on marketing, when fundraising can come from anywhere, and when talent is globally distributed, the startup playbook is flipped on its head. Concepts like fundraising, exiting, and equity are being reframed. The narrative arc of company building that Silicon Valley knows and loves is shifting. Today, I'm excited to introduce some of the founders, technologists, and venture capitalists exploring these uncharted opportunities. We'll hear some do's and don'ts of pitching your startup to VCs, as well as tactical tips about hiring, structuring your cap table, and how to prioritize capital deployment when you're bootstrapped. We'll see a technical preview of an OpenChat demonstration and meet a few startups that have elected to build their companies on the internet computer. Fleek, Capsule, Tassin, and LinkedUp will share some early learnings about what company building strategy looks like on the open internet. We'll hear the nuanced ways these companies are navigating concepts like network scale, geo-agnosticism, self-sovereign identity, decentralized social media, and more. There are lessons to be learned from this pioneering class building on the open internet, and these founders are taking that to heart. We hope this event will start conversations about entrepreneurship on the open internet. As always, we want to hear from you. Find us on Twitter at DFINITY and tell us your thoughts. If you want to revisit any of the advice that you hear today, you can find all of the segments on the DFINITY YouTube channel. First up, we'll hear a conversation about how the open internet boom is changing the narrative around entrepreneurship. This fireside chat features DFINITY founder and chief scientist Dominic Williams and is moderated by TechCrunch editor-at-large Mike Butcher. Keep your browser tab open for updates on internet computer progress and to hear more from founders who are showing us what it means to build big startups without big tech.
Well, it's time to catch us up on what's been happening at DFINITY with Dominic Williams. Dominic, you're heading towards the genesis or the public launch of the internet computer. But the question is, what does this actually mean? And what does it also mean for entrepreneurs who might want to build companies on the internet computer?
Well, this is the advent of a whole new paradigm in tech, where a public blockchain can provide a complete solution for building systems, internet services, DeFi, and many other things, so that you can build directly in cyberspace without need for any of traditional tech. So you can build without need for cloud services, servers, firewalls, databases, web servers. None of that stuff that you traditionally use today will be needed anymore. You'll be able to build entirely by writing smart contracts into cyberspace.
This has come up a lot in the last few years, and people have talked about the concept of a blockchain computer. But you're talking about a blockchain computer that can run at web speed with unbounded capacity. Do you want to unpack that for us?
Well, I mean, of course, blockchain is a fast evolving branch of tech. I mean, the first blockchain came out in early 2009, Bitcoin, and that was very slow and only acted as a ledger for these tokens that now play the role of digital gold very successfully. A few years after that, in 2015, Ethereum launched, and it made the blockchain programmable with smart contracts. And it was faster than Bitcoin, but still far too slow to use for general purposes. And for example, it couldn't protect the privacy of data stored on chain. Smart contracts couldn't directly serve web into browsers and things like that. So the internet computer takes us on that final jump and provides the world with a public blockchain that runs at web speed, so it's fast enough for general use. Smart contracts can serve web directly into browsers. And most importantly, it has unbounded capacity, which essentially means that as demand for on-chain computation grows, it just grows its capacity. It grows its capacity by expanding its network. The network actually is comprised of special standardized node machines. So the internet computer runs on these standardized node machines, which are installed in independent data centers around the world, in much the same way as the internet runs on routing devices.
But doesn't that mean that people are hidebound by that capacity? And is it back to old-fashioned server architecture?
No, not at all. So the internet computer is a serverless environment. There's no concept of a server or compute instance like you have on Amazon Web Services. The internet computer provides a seamless environment for smart contracts, and it can hold any number of smart contracts. So that universe is as big as you need it to be. And one of the other advantages of this is that the cost of computation remains very low and constant. And that compares to traditional blockchains, which have finite compute capacity, and therefore must use things called fee markets to determine which computations actually get run, which pushes the costs of computations up to enormous levels.
How different, again, is what you're doing compared to using a platform like Ethereum, for instance?
Well, Ethereum is great for DeFi and it introduced the world to smart contracts, but it certainly doesn't scale, first of all. So, a gigabyte of storage on Ethereum will cost you about $5 million. By comparison, a gigabyte of storage on the internet computer will cost you less than $5 a year. So we're talking about a 1,000,000x reduction in price. And there are, of course, many other areas that the internet computer also delivers features that you need if you want to build, for example, a mass market, hyperscale internet service on chain. It can run at web speed. Your smart contracts can serve web directly into browsers. And all of this, of course, is within an environment that also supports things that only blockchains can provide, like tokenization and autonomy. So what's so important for entrepreneurs out there is that on the internet computer, you can reimagine how you build everything. Sure, look, if you're an enterprise, you can reimagine how you build enterprise systems. You can build them on the internet computer where they'll be tamper-proof. You don't have to protect systems on the internet computer with a firewall because they're built on a tamper-proof platform, and that's one of the advantages of smart contracts. But if you're an entrepreneur, you can completely reimagine how an internet service works. So, for example, you might build Open Uber, and you might provide tokens to early riders and early drivers to incentivize participation. If you want to create a social media platform, you might use tokens to create a system, an economic system where the community both helps in providing signal regarding what content should be promoted and also plays the role of moderator. And you might design it in such a way that it becomes far more viral. If you want to create something like open photos, Google Photos, say, you might provide APIs that are non-revocable so that, lots of other teams of developers can extend open photos. So, whereas, Google Photos only supplies a handful of image filters to use, Open Photos might be able to provide its users with hundreds and hundreds of image filters because the broader community can participate and create filters for users to apply to their photographs.
I want to push you on this because we know that the crypto space got hotter and more mainstream in 2020 and obviously this year as well. But there's also this sort of open internet boom that you've hinted at. That we know that the .com boom took off because it was partly enabled by ability to run open source servers like Apache and Linux. So do you think we're sort of heading into a kind of a similar new era of entrepreneurial opportunity because of that sort of open source nature that's been opened up recently?
Absolutely. I mean, everyone's aware of the boom that's taken place in blockchain already. And, I think the space is still very nascent and this is still the beginning. But the reason there's been so much energy in blockchain is it supports a completely new way of doing things, where you can build on these sort of public chains in cyberspace. You build using software that's tamper-proof, that can process tokens, that can be autonomous, and all kinds of other things. And the internet computer takes that and pushes the boundaries with respect to speed, cost, capacity, enables smart contracts to serve web experiences directly, and things like that, and many other things actually, so that the scope of what you can do on blockchain is greatly increased. So now you can actually build a mass market internet service on chain. And if you're an entrepreneur, you can make that an open internet service with governance tokens. And you can, for example, sell those governance tokens to raise financing. So you can actually raise money from the decentralized internet.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get into next, was the idea of building a company. So, we're familiar with, fundraising in the traditional internet space using VCs and stuff. What about the advantages and disadvantages of building an open infrastructure company or a startup? I mean, for instance, talking about pitching an open internet company or fundraising from an open internet company. What are the kinds of things that are going to be different, do you think, in this world?
Well, again, it's a whole new paradigm. So when you change the platform paradigm, you change the computing paradigm, you also inevitably change the business paradigm. And the way in which blockchain projects, the actual layer one chains have raised money and financed themselves, will now be extended to layer two, people building on top of the chains. So for example, DFINITY is a not-for-profit foundation based in Zurich, Switzerland, and it created a ledger of governance tokens that will be used to control the internet computer. And it sold these governance tokens to raise money for R&D. And the foundation itself is a not-for-profit. There are no members. It can't be sold. It can't pivot. Can't be acquired. The value is actually in the network and the governance tokens. Now, that same model will apply to entrepreneurs building open internet services. So for example, I think we're going to demonstrate something called, at the moment, just referred to as OpenChat, that a team of 2 developers have been working on. And, at some point in the future, they might turn that into an open internet service. Essentially, OpenChat will be the internet service equivalent of an open source software project. And it'll run autonomously and be controlled by governance tokens. Now, the individuals behind OpenChat could potentially, when they convert OpenChat into an open internet service so that it's controlled by governance tokens, then sell these governance tokens to raise funding to support a bigger R&D team. And they could also indeed just share these governance tokens with other developers on the internet to incentivize them. They could, create feature and bug bounties, paid rewarded, where the rewards are paid in these governance tokens. So, sometimes you're going to see, something more akin to the traditional model where there's a company is incorporated, and that company raises venture capital initially, and then perhaps creates an open internet service and, for example, eventually maybe dissolves itself and disperses all of the governance tokens it's acquired in that process to its stockholders. Other times, we're going to just see, sort of ecosystems of developers emerging on the internet that collaboratively build out these and maintain these open internet services.
So do you think that the concept of an exit is sort of different when you're operating on this kind of business model?
Absolutely. So today, the traditional model is that you incorporate a company, hire a team, get a prototype, get some seed money, go to VCs, do an A round, B round, and so on and so forth. And the ultimate aim is to get large enough you can IPO and make your company public, whereupon you can trade your shares freely on a stock market such as NASDAQ or NYSE. In the future, people are going to create open internet services, and the moment they convert their prototype internet service into an open internet service, they're going to get, say, a billion governance tokens. And they're going to be able to immediately start selling those governance tokens via the internet itself, via the decentralized internet, to raise funds to support the further development of that project. And we've already seen hints of this kind of thing with ICOs. And it's probably fair to say the initial ICO boom was a bit chaotic and a lot of funds were misdirected, and some things were successful, but a lot of things weren't successful. But that's going to get much more sophisticated in the future, and we're going to see more and more teams raising money through the internet itself. And certainly when you talk about an exit, I think, look, if you're a founder and you create a successful open internet service, the needs of an open internet service sort of behove you to sell your stake down to, say, 15%, because it's not an open internet service if you have a controlling stake. So, certainly you will get liquidity much earlier on than you would in the traditional model.
If it's the case that these kinds of companies will see liquidity faster, how much funding does an early stage company need, or is it just a matter of releasing tokens in the way that you mentioned?
Well, that's a really good question. Certainly in the first ICO boom on Ethereum, vast sums of money were raised by a variety of startups. And it's not at all clear that the sums of money they raised were necessary or commensurate with the actual stage of the projects or aims of the projects involved. So I think it's certainly the case that currently it's much easier to raise funding within the decentralized ecosystem than it is to raise funding the traditional route through angel investors and venture capitalists. I think as the space matures and there are more professional entrepreneurs seeking to raise money through the decentralized internet rather than the traditional route, I guess market forces will equalize the difficulty eventually. But certainly at the moment, it's a lot easier to raise capital in the decentralized ecosystem.
What are some of the disadvantages of going into this world? Or do you not see any at all?
Honestly, speaking from an entrepreneurial perspective, one of the biggest lessons I've learned over the years is that, it's much easier to surf a wave than to be paddling out. Like, timing is everything. Like, you want to identify a rapidly expanding opportunity and place yourself there. And it's true that, when you get these paradigm shifts, that's where you get these waves of opportunity that you can surf. And that's reflected, I guess, in how much easier it is to raise money within the decentralized ecosystem today than it is through traditional routes. So certainly, I believe the open internet boom is going to be absolutely colossal. If you consider the size of the blockchain boom, which is part of that, you can see it's already pretty colossal, and we're just in the foothills of what's going to happen. All of our online services are going to be reimagined in completely new ways as open internet services that run autonomously on chain and in some ways exist almost like the sort of equivalent of an open software project. But in other ways, also are able to be very competitive because they can leverage all kinds of new functionality. And one of the biggest things, I think, is that it enables a much more collaborative approach to building internet services, so that you get a much more dynamic, innovative, and ultimately richer internet ecosystem. And you combine that with tokenization and other things, and it becomes very apparent why this new breed of internet services is ultimately going to outcompete closed monopolistic systems over the next 10 to 20 years.
Sure, but it sounds like a fantastic Shangri-La, but you and I both know that large swathes of these internet systems are controlled by companies like Apple and Google and Android and iOS. I mean, how do you see your vision playing out in that world, in, say, for instance, the smartphone world?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I think one of the biggest, one of the major hurdles that will slow down the growth of the open internet ecosystem is indeed big tech's stranglehold on smartphones. And the reason is they can decide which services appear in the app stores. And for that reason, I think a lot of early open internet services will be entirely web-based. So even on a smartphone, you'll access them through web browsers. But moving on a few more years, I think we're going to see open versions of we're going to see new operating systems, new kinds of devices. I mean, without getting into too many details, we've conceived of new kinds of phones that just run WebAssembly. And you don't have an app store, you just put in a URL and it sort of loads the WebAssembly applet onto your phone and runs it in a sandbox. I think, if you go forward 5+ years, we're going to see new kinds of smartphone.
It could be the case. So we look forward to seeing that happen. Lots of people put blockchain into a kind of a box, don't we? And it happens a lot, especially in the media. Do you think blockchain's still a sort of a startup vertical, or do you think it's going to be more pervasive than that?
I like using the phrase open internet boom. And blockchain's just one part of that. So traditionally, when people talk about blockchain, they mean cryptocurrency or DeFi created with smart contracts. The internet computer transforms blockchain into a full compute platform by giving it unbounded capacity, enabling it to run at web speed, enabling smart contracts to serve web and many other things. So, really what it's enabling is an open internet boom where people can build on the internet. That's why it's called the internet computer. And the word blockchain can be misunderstood to mean, well, this is just something to do with cryptocurrency or smart contracts running DeFi. So, yeah, I will see how the terminology emerges. Maybe the blockchain takes on new meaning with the internet computer. We'll see.
The other thing, you mentioned DeFi a lot. Well, Silicon Valley became big because it was all about the physical proximity of people. 30-mile radius for VCs. I remember speaking to a VC who would only invest in startups that he could skateboard to. What effect do you think this decentralized route is going to have on founders? I mean, we're talking about new kinds of apps and platforms being developed basically anywhere.
It's going to have an absolutely tremendous effect and be very impactful in a good way. So one of my personal tests for the success of the internet computer is that it would enable somebody who's smart and determined in a developing world nation, such as a computer nerd based in Lagos, Nigeria, to build, launch, finance, and make successful a mass market internet service. So with the internet computer, someone is going to be able to build an internet service using, for example, a low-cost Chromebook where they just write smart contract code, push it straight up onto the internet computer, get their prototype internet service going, convert it into an open internet service, start selling the governance tokens to raise funds for development, or using the governance tokens to incentivize other developers all around the world who are connected to the internet to start participating in building out the internet service. So, I mean, one of the biggest challenges that I hope we can fix is that today, only a small fraction of the world's potential talent is able to have a shot at building an internet service. And for the most part, it's people located here in Silicon Valley. You can do it in Europe, but it's much harder. But in other places, it's several times even more difficult. And the internet computer can help level the playing field so that the remaining 99% of the world's talent gets a shot at building the internet of the future.
So thinking about the other end of the spectrum, away from a grassroots developer, say you're a big company already, you've raised a Series B funding round, for instance, enterprise SaaS product, you've got 10,000 paying customers or something. What would be the point, for instance, of incorporating something like the internet computer? When would it be too late to leverage that technology?
Well, that's a good question. I think there are enormous opportunities for industries as a whole and corporations within the public blockchain space. I'll give you a great example. There's a project called Origin based in Switzerland, and they've created a pan-industry platform aimed initially at the Swiss watch industry, which wants to track the provenance of Swiss watches. So they've connected this platform with this very clever digital fingerprinting technology that can look at a watch, detect microscopic imperfections, if you like, or differences in the way that the markers of the hour markers are laid out, and re-identify that watch later on. But they're extending their platform into the luxury world generally, with handbags and jewelry and so on and so forth. And then once they've done that, they'll go into yet more industries. Now, that platform is being created by the Origin Foundation, but the industries involved are participating as well. So the governance tokens for that platform that tracks the provenance of these luxury items are being dispersed widely amongst industry participants. So that's an example of how an extremely valuable platform can be brought into being, and the very, very traditional companies that have often been around in some cases for hundreds of years can participate in the value creation.
What about industries do you think are going to benefit from this? Because there are sectors which suffer a lot from this massive centralization. What do you think are the kinds of industries that are going to benefit most from this decentralization?
Well, entrepreneurs building open internet services and DeFi. So my belief is that 10 years from now, DeFi will be as big as traditional finance. 20 years from now, traditional finance will be tiny compared to DeFi. Just DeFi alone is an absolutely colossal, stunning entrepreneurial opportunity. That's one of your waves, right? Which you can surf. Open internet services are going to be just as big as that. I think pretty much the entire internet ecosystem is going to be reimagined around this model. Again, 10 years, I'd say that open internet services will be as big as the sort of, closed proprietary services run by big tech monopolies.
Do you see new kinds of business models developing once people create companies on the open web?
Yeah, so I think, so I'm sort of, I'm agnostic on this. I sort of reserve judgment. I think, certainly when you build on the internet computer, it becomes much more straightforward to implement things like micropayment models. So, for example, it becomes much more straightforward to, create content where, a user can see something for the equivalent payment of 10 cents, and do that at lower friction. But generally, I believe there are reasons why those models haven't already taken root. And people like getting free content, for example, and that means that advertising will continue to play a role. So I think while it's possible, and we will see new business models on the internet computer, and certainly it's possible to create all kinds of new business models, we'll still see the old models around, like advertising.
I'm sure we will see lots of those kinds of models change and evolve as this thing grows. But finally, I'd like to ask you, what's your vision of the ideal scenario for an entrepreneur in this space? It's somebody in a refugee camp in Africa who just creates something and suddenly becomes incredibly successful overnight, or is it somebody a kid from a working class family, middle blue collar family in north of England, or is it that kind of vision you got?
All of that. Look, we're going to, the open internet and blockchain generally, it presents an amazing entrepreneurial opportunity. And there are going to be lots of smart people in Silicon Valley who continue to successfully build out new enterprises on this new platform. But, I think one of our indicators of success is going to be that, the kind of people you just mentioned are able to participate and compete on a level playing field. And that's going to be possible because, you can, imagine, look, if you were a computer nerd in Lagos, Nigeria, you couldn't even get an Amazon Web Services account, right? And using traditional infrastructure, you actually need quite a lot of computing equipment in order to build anything, right? With the internet computer, you can just write code in a web browser on a cheap Chromebook, say, and push it to the internet computer to build your prototype internet service. And just from there, turn it into an open internet service and start selling the governance tokens to raise money or incentivize other developers around the internet and bootstrap the whole thing from where you are. So it's certainly true that we're going to be extending opportunity all the way around the world. And I think that's brilliant for the world economy. We're going to be bringing our vastly more of our human assets to bear within the tech economy, and that can only be a good thing.
Well, I think that's probably a good note to end on. So thanks very much, Dominic.
Thanks, Mike.
I'm excited to welcome Harrison Heinz, who is the co-founder of Fleek, a developer platform for Web3. His company has raised $4 million to scale its product. Welcome, Harrison.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Harrison, tell us, what is Fleek's product and who is it for?
So Fleek is a developer platform for building on the open web and the internet computer. And so we build products that essentially mimic traditional web infrastructure that any app or site would need, such as hosting, storage, databases, authentication, serverless functions. But all of those products on Fleek are built on the internet computer under the hood. Today, we support thousands of sites and apps. Most of the apps in the Ethereum space use Fleek for hosting. Most of the projects in the NFT space use Fleek for storage. So now all these products we are essentially bringing to the internet computer so that Web3 developers, who is our initial customer focus, but now also the entire Web2 developer base who's interested in the internet computer or who's just interested in the benefits that the internet computer brings, such as trustlessness, permissionlessness, 100% uptime, no need to worry about infrastructure, auto scaling, things of that nature. Now the entire Web2 ecosystem for the first time could actually be onboarded to Web3 because of the internet computer. And so Fleek makes that extremely easy to do, where you don't have to learn anything new. You don't have to, rewrite any code. You could do exactly what you're used to doing, but now get the benefits of the internet computer and move your application or site to the internet computer, basically in a few clicks.
One of the main reasons startups shut down is because they can't scale their infrastructure. For a marketplace company like Uber or Airbnb, the business is only as strong as its network effects. For social platforms like Instagram, TikTok, or a dating app, you won't gain traction unless you see this viral user adoption. SaaS companies won't see revenue unless they grow an engaged base of paying customers. So as a company that wants to make it easy to build websites and apps on the new open internet, what have you learned about network scale? How is scaling a company like Uber or Instagram on centralized infrastructure different from your experience of scaling a company like Fleek that's built for and on the open internet?
When you build on these new open public networks, you get to outsource a lot of that to the network itself. And so essentially when you compare a project like Uniswap to a company like Coinbase, Coinbase has had to raise billions of dollars and hire thousands of people. And a lot of that cost is related to infrastructure, custody, but also scaling infrastructure to handle the increased usage. And they still go down every busy trading day. On the other hand, Uniswap has 100% uptime, has never went down. And one kid with, a small grant from the community was able to build something that in 18 months is almost on par with Coinbase in terms of how much volume and throughput it could handle. With these open systems, not only do you get the infrastructure scale you need without any of the problems associated with scaling that infrastructure, it's now enabling that to happen at an even faster pace. Because all the users are of the platform and not necessarily of a specific app, any app that joins the platform now has the benefit of all these users, for example, who already have a MetaMask wallet, who already have, tokens in their wallet, the ability to service users without any friction, without needing to sign contracts, without needing to agree to terms. All these things makes just the ability, on the infrastructure side, to not need to worry about how do you scale an application like that, just have to worry about writing your app logic and outsource the infrastructure piece to the network and let it automatically and infinitely scale to what your app actually needs and never have to worry about those issues. And then on the other hand, being able to tap into that enormous user base that you would have had to work really hard for and pay a lot of money to acquire. Now on these open networks, it's kind of the opposite, where the user is already there and they're looking for good products. And so things are happening much, much faster.
In the startup world, it's widely believed that founders have to be experts in the sector that they're building in. When you listen to a pitch, you hear founders detail extensive geographic market research that's helped inform their company. They're trying to prove that they have a founder market fit. It can get as specific as analysis of food delivery trends in a New York City borough between the hours of 9 and 11 p.m. Or, things as specific as that. So geography plays this critical role for startups. You even see founders raise additional rounds of capital so that they can launch the same exact product in an adjacent country. So for a company built on blockchain or open internet infrastructure, it seems like there could be a diminished importance of geography when it comes to ideating a startup. Do you see this geo-agnosticism as an advantage for Fleek?
For sure. And I think not only for Fleek, but for all entrepreneurs who are considering building in this Web3 open web ecosystem. I think for sure, given the global nature of these public networks, you really are building for a global audience because, especially on the use cases we've seen so far work very well in Web3, which are mostly financial. These are services everyone in the world needs, not just people in a certain, geographic location. And that the same applies for non-financial services, but everything, everyone needs social media, everyone needs access to content or news, everyone needs financial services. And so now it just kind of enables you to build a product that anyone in the world could use. But now with these new open platforms, you essentially can create digitally native companies. So part of it is geographic, but part of it is also just from a legal entity standpoint. The fact that you have these platforms now that could facilitate and replace the roles and purpose of having an entity in the first place, to have a bank account so you can collect funds. Well, now you could do that with a smart contract. Having the ability to manage those funds, to distribute those funds, to have governance over those funds and of the software and source code and just everything that you're doing, now can all be handled by smart contracts or canisters. The DAOs and the capabilities of these digitally native, organizations now lead to basically geography being irrelevant. There's going to be an explosion of, I'd say, innovation that comes from all over the world now that you remove these sort of like synthetic restrictions that were placed on entrepreneurs and startups in the past.
So this concept of an exit is completely flipped on its head. So, a founder is no longer in this infrastructure attempting to develop a technology and then, 7 years later, sell it to Google for $50 million.
100%. An exit in this Web3 space is you want to exit to your community, regardless of the platform, regardless of the application or the use case, whether it's a DeFi protocol or whether it's, a new open version of YouTube or Reddit or whatever. The goal in this space for all entrepreneurs should be figuring out a way to eventually be able to exit to your community and early users. And then instead of, you hiring a marketing team and trying to acquire all the users yourself, your users, your community, essentially become your marketing force. It's not like Bitcoin is paying a marketing agency to market Bitcoin. Every single person in the world who holds Bitcoin is the marketing department for Bitcoin. And that is much stronger and much more effective when we look back 20 years from now and understand, how did these tech giants go down? It's like, oh, they lost to these newcomers who actually distributed value fairly to everyone involved who was adding value to that network or platform. It's gonna be like, oh, well, that seems obvious.
Tell me about your product roadmap. What does 2021 hold in store for you?
Our databases, our serverless functions, our storage of user data or files or whatever it might be, our static front end, all the APIs we call out to, all of this infrastructure can be rebuilt as canister-based services. And so Fleek, the entire platform by the end of the year, will be a fully canister-based platform with a token distributed to a community that controls Fleek, and where it goes from there would be out of our control and essentially in the hands of the community, and the entire fate and future of Fleek would then essentially be determined by them. So that's what our roadmap looks like for this year, is kind of building all those different core web infrastructure pieces to have feature parity with a platform like AWS or Netlify, but everything built on top of the internet computer as canister-based services, and then ending with Fleek itself moving to those canisters and distributing a token that essentially controls the governance and everything about Fleek.
Harrison, what advice do you have for an entrepreneur who's curious about developing their new startup on an open internet infrastructure as opposed to a big tech-owned infrastructure?
Figure out how to not build as a company, but instead build as a community-owned, token-controlled network. Over time, things are definitely moving to decentralized, networks that are essentially owned and governed by a community of token holders. And so when you're thinking about building in this space, really that's where people should be thinking, is not so much how can I build a company to do this thing, but how can I build a decentralized, community-owned version of this thing.
Harrison, this has been a great conversation. Thanks for joining us. It seems like Fleek is seeing a lot of early momentum, so keep us posted. I'm excited to welcome Nadim Kabesi, who is the founder of Capsule. Nadim, 8 days after tweeting your intent to design a decentralized social media solution, you found yourself with $1 million in funding and press coverage of your company, despite not having a working prototype at the time. TechCrunch reported that you pegged Capsule at a $10 million post-money valuation on paper. So it can take startups years to get to the point that you reached in just a few days. Tell me, how do you explain the course of events that got you here so quickly?
So I posted a tweet on Twitter that indicated that I thought that this was a problem that needed solving. I said that I was designing a decentralized platform for sharing writings and social media posts. And I was wondering whether people would be interested in having something like that that was secure, easy to use, and lightweight, and easy to deploy. And the response was very strong. There was, I think, thousands of people interacted with the tweet, whether they shared it or liked it. And one of the people that got in touch with me very early on and was a huge encouragement was Balaji Srinivasan, who is someone who's been vocal about these topics. And he was the person that sort of gave me some advice on how to set this all up.
To what extent does Capsule intend to interact with the internet computer? And why does building on the internet computer make sense for your business model?
I have a scientific background, and so for me, buzzwords I have an allergic reaction to buzzwords. And so whenever people ask me whether I needed a blockchain or was going to use a blockchain for Capsule, I immediately was very skeptical of the idea. However, during development, I realized that there are a few specific problems that were problems that could be most easily solved using a custom blockchain-like structure. The nice thing about DFINITY, or as it's called, the internet computer, is that it allows, the way I see it as a developer, is that it allows me to basically define my own custom little blockchain. So I can just go with the thing that works for Capsule the most. And this is why I'm currently looking at DFINITY, because it allows me to create something that is very specific to the use case of Capsule. And when you're trying to build something that will have mass adoption, you want to build a product and to build a user experience that is very focused on the use case. It does exactly what you want it to do and nothing more. This leads to a more streamlined user experience. It leads to a more performance stack. It leads to something that developers can maintain better. And so these are the reasons why I'm looking at something like DFINITY for this particular subset of problems that Capsule will need to solve in order to be a viable product.
There are other decentralized social networks out there. It's also been noted that usage for these decentralized social platforms is rather low, especially compared to Facebook or Twitter, who see billions of monthly active users and whose networks are enforced by big tech. So talk about where Capsule fits in here. How could Capsule evolve to be better than existing decentralized social that has not seen significant user adoption, but also different from massive saturated networks like Facebook or Twitter?
I think it's very important for me to just say it out loud and admit it. I simply don't think that, looking at something like a decentralized social network and saying that it's going to have the same adoption as Facebook or Twitter or Instagram is basically to me like saying that a vegetarian restaurant is going to have the same allure as McDonald's. I don't think that's necessarily true, and I don't think that's what vegetarian restaurants are setting out to do. I think that they're setting out to offer something that is perhaps healthier for you, perhaps better for the environment. And if you aren't interested in that, there's no shame in going and getting a Big Mac, right? It's what matters is the choice. If you care about these things, if you think that the society is better served, the planet is better served, your social circle is better served by making these choices, you can go down the capsule route, the vegetarian route, I guess. Um, and that can have a significant impact on the way that you write and discuss and share content and interact with people on the internet.
Facebook and Twitter have accumulated billions of users that power these massive advertising networks with advanced targeting mechanisms. Would a user ever see ads on Capsule?
No, Capsule is going to be open source software from day one. The idea of ads on Capsule is ludicrous. The entire format that we're building Capsule in is such, it's actually kind of similar to the WordPress business model or to the GitLab business model, where the core offering is fully transparently open source, high quality open source code that involves a community of enthusiasts and technological experts. The idea of ads or the idea of us interfering with the user experience or with the content, God forbid, in any way, in order to have an effect on the survival of the company is, I mean, why would we go the decentralized route if we cared about stuff like that?
In 2016, Facebook deprioritized publisher content in its core product of the newsfeed. This was a response to the spread of misinformation enforced by its own algorithms, as well as foreign United States election interference that infiltrated the platform. So it's been posited that fact-checked journalism should not exist within the same network where people are liking photos of a sandwich that their friend had for lunch that day. As new social platforms like Capsule are being built on decentralized infrastructure, how are you thinking about the intersection of journalism and news and person-to-person social interactions on these new networks?
Well, I think the key word that you mentioned there is algorithms. And it's true that Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and other services organize content based on a opaque algorithm that is not revealed. So Twitter, for example, used to organize content based on chronology. Just new stuff gets shown at the top, old stuff at the bottom. And now this has to be enabled every time, but by default, they organize content based on some algorithm, and it's not really understood how that algorithm works. In Capsule, these opaque algorithms are simply not going to be part of the service. We will organize content based on categories, which are self-assigned by the users, based on popularity of posts, if the content viewer chooses to organize based on that metric, as well as by simple time-based ordering, or maybe which posts were shared by the people that they're following. But the thing is that every algorithm we're going to have for organizing content is going to be something that is objectively verifiable.
In 2020, amid the turbulent US election, we saw the deplatforming of users on Parler. Facebook and Twitter were also faced with the decision to deplatform former President Donald Trump due to misinformation about the election that was coming from his social accounts, as well as the former president's incitement of violence at the Capitol. Facebook, Alphabet, Twitter, and Amazon found themselves in this bizarre situation where they had to make ethical decisions about what content can exist on the internet and where that content can or cannot live. When big tech owns our communication channels and deplatforming decisions are made by tech CEOs, we see a dangerous precedent being set around free speech. Nadim, as someone who is starting a decentralized social platform, what's your take on how we got to this point?
Currently, when there is objectionable speech on Twitter, for example, the appropriate mechanism on Twitter is to report that, and there is a team of individuals that work on Twitter that review that content and make a decision. Now, there is a problem with that approach for a bunch of reasons. The first is that that team of individuals will invariably be just a bunch of people, perhaps living somewhere in the United States, and that certainly cannot extend to covering the appropriateness of content originating from all around the world, which could have context relevance that could escape individuals that live in the United States, and so may not allow them to make the best judgment on whether that content should or should not be censored. I don't think that centralization works for content moderation, and this is something that has been admitted by the Twitter team, which is why they're looking at decentralizing that as well as by other social media giants. The way that we're trying to handle this in Capsule is by mirroring exactly the sort of infrastructure that existed in the first place when the web was created. The discussion of whether your content is online, whether you can post new content through your Capsule microservice, should be a discussion that is between you and your hosting provider, which you choose. You decide who your hosting provider is, and that discussion happens between you and them. And if they kick you off, that's okay. We want those hosts to have all of the tools that they need at their disposal in order to deal with these problems. We don't want anyone to exploit Capsule in order to create hate speech or objectionable speech, rather, on the internet. But what is really important to us is that this decision be a organically decentralized decision that is taken in a discussion between the creator of the objectionable content and their chosen web host. And this is a fully consensual relationship, that is very different from one where a team of individuals at Twitter decide speech for the world, which is bizarre. So I think it's interesting, as it's been said, that these big tech giants have been using power that maybe they didn't even know they had in ways that they never thought they would, especially not as early as 2020 or 2021. And it's interesting how companies that aren't immediately themselves social media giants, but are still incredibly powerful, such as Google or Amazon or Apple, are in some instances just like on the same day or in the same hour even taking down entire platforms from the internet. Apple removes it from the App Store, Google removes it from the Play Store, and then Amazon removes it from the internet, period. Even if you just have a little web browser, you can't access the website anymore. It's in a very artificial and bizarre construction. It's a bunch of little small content moderation teams at private service companies, which is just purely a function of happenstance, purely a function of circumstance, that it ended up being organized like this because of the concentration of capital and a bunch of key innovations at these companies on the technological level. And so, yeah, I think that this is something that definitely inspired Capsule, and something that should be a big question on people's minds. How much power are we giving to certain companies to inform our discourse, and not just inform our discourse, direct our thoughts, direct our arguments, and also decide on who gets to say what? There's a certain kind of vice in centralization and in opacity and in the way that these institutions and these companies and these algorithms work. And it basically, the effect, I think, is going to be the same as the effect that kind of like brought down McDonald's a little bit, like down a peg or two, where people loved McDonald's in the 80s and in the 90s, but then discovered that it's really terrible for your health, right, in certain ways. And then certainly this has actually led to McDonald's making a lot of reforms in the way that they deal with the nutritional properties of their sandwiches and their products, right? Like McDonald's food has actually gotten a bit healthier in the past 10 years. Why? Because McDonald's was humiliated as a result of everyone realizing that it's, for a while it was actually junk in the 90s, and then you have these pushes for healthier alternatives. And I think that we're kind of going to see the similar reaction here, where companies like Facebook are going to face a lot of public humiliation. Like using Facebook in comparison to using a decentralized, a truly open alternative is going to be seen like eating junk food all day, like smoking, for example, is seen in certain circles. I think that this is going to be the social mentality, or like the social approach, society's approach to these issues. And from there, once you have a critical mass of that, you either get, as you say, a response from those groups like, oh, we're a healthy breakfast company now, or something along those lines, or you get some other type of competition, or they just fold and decide that, yeah, we actually should clean up and do something that is more socially responsible.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited to follow the progress of Capsule.
Thank you. This has been a wild ride and a great opportunity, and I very much am excited to see where it all goes.
I'm excited to welcome UK-based developers Hamish Peebles and Matt Grogan, who will take us through an open, decentralized chat application that they've built on the internet computer. Earlier this year, there were concerns around WhatsApp's updated privacy policy. It required users to accept that their information will be shared with Facebook before continuing to use the app. This resulted in the privacy-focused messaging app Signal growing to become one of the most downloaded apps on both Android and iOS. Around the same time, Telegram saw a surge of 25 million new users from the App Store within a period of just 72 hours. Hamish and Matt will explain how developers can build apps with both the front end and the back end of the app hosted natively on the internet computer.
Hello, I'm Hamish. I'm a software engineer, and for the past few months I've been working alongside Matt on a new messaging service called OpenChat. OpenChat is very similar in terms of functionality to WhatsApp and Signal and Telegram and so on, but under the hood it's very different. It runs on the internet computer as what's called an autonomous app, and this means that rather than being owned by a single entity, it instead is directed by those people who hold the governance tokens. They can vote on the changes that get proposed. So in our case, we will be distributing those governance tokens amongst the users. So essentially the users have final say on any changes that we or other people want to make to this service. The code will all be public, so anyone can take a look at it and suggest changes. They can even make changes themselves, which would be nice. But of course, any changes that would negatively affect users, so for example, if someone proposed a change which tracked user activity or could somehow read user messages, the users simply wouldn't vote it through, and so that change wouldn't get accepted. This doesn't mean that your average user is going to need to look at the code though. How it works is with the voting, you can opt for your voting weight to simply follow someone else who you trust's votes. So you could follow me if you wanted, or anyone who you think would be acting in the best interest for you and the OpenChat service. It's open to the people and it's run by the people.
Hi, I'm Matt and I'm going to show you OpenChat. We don't have much time, so I'm just going to show you the basic functionality. Hamish and I started developing the app 3 months ago, so it's still early days and there are plenty of features on our roadmap, so do bear with us. I'm going to start by pasting the URL into Chrome, the OpenChat URL into Chrome. As you can see at the moment, it's not a very friendly URL. This will become this will be a domain name in time. The first thing you must do is sign in with the internet computer. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is redirecting me to an identity provider hosted on the IC. I'm going to create a profile. I'm going to use my USB security key. I could use a password or a fingerprint sensor. Just do that. Just press my security key. And don't worry about the contents of this. This is basically saying that I'm giving access, granting this user access to OpenChat. And finish. It's now redirecting back to the OpenChat app. And I now need to register. I'm just going to pick some name. Go ahead and register. This will take a few seconds. Okay, I'm just going to give myself a profile image. And I'm going to start a new chat. I'm going to find an existing user. So, hello. So this message is being sent via the IC, an OpenChat canister. We'll just wait for a tick. So that tick means that it's been received by the internet computer. I'm just now going to make this window a bit smaller and bring in off screen. I've got another window with Alice's. Sorry, this is another browser with another session with signed in as user Alice. I can have with Chrome, Incognito, Safari, and Firefox, etc., you can have different sessions at the moment. So it's allowing me to do this demo. So you can see that Alice has received a message from Matt Grogan, and she's going to say hello to you. And as you can see, I received that straight away, and again, whatever. And as Alice is typing, you can see that on Matt's window, you can see that Alice is typing, and likewise, as Matt's typing, you can see on Alice's window that Matt's typing. So these instantaneous messages and these typing notifications are being sent via a peer-to-peer, so peer-to-peer via WebRTC or using WebRTC. WebRTC connections are brokered using the OpenChat canisters hosted on the IC, so it's not using legacy IT service to do this. Now, let me just send an image of a dog. Now, at the moment, just text messages are being sent via WebRTC, so images take a bit longer. So let's wait for a notification. There we go. I was just going to send back. So I'm going to send back a video. This will take a bit longer because the videos are obviously bigger. So it's just been uploaded from my disk to this browser, and it's now being sent across the computer. Here we go, and let's just download it. Just play that. Okay. You can send. There's other type. You can send other types of file, and they can be downloaded by the user. Some emojis. Right, now I'm going to create a group chat. So, and just wait a second for that to register the IC, and then I can add participants. So I'm going to add Alice, and I'm going to add Homer, Bobby, and Hamish. Right, now I'm going to send. I've actually also got a session with Simon as Homer. So I'm going to send a message from Matt to these to Alice and Homer. Hello, in my group. So you can see Alice has received that straight away, and Homer's received it. Let's send it back from Alice. It's taking a little longer for Homer at the moment. It's still establishing a WebRTC connection with him with this browser. But that, as you've seen, that's now instantaneous, so that's now being established. And as you can see, you could have more than one, user typing. Okay, so that's about it, really. There's one last thing I want to talk about. Typical for a demo, it's not fully working. Well, it's not working at the moment, but I'll still maybe worth showing you because it's quite an exciting feature. So if I go to direct chat, you can also send cycles to users across, using the messaging app. And let me just give you some background on that. Cycles are similar to gas in Ethereum and are used to pay for IC resources, individual resources down to the CPU instruction and byte of memory. As such, the basic unit of cycles is in trillions, or T for short. So as developers of the IC, we'll need to hold a wallet of cycles to pay for the running of the app. There's a long story around voting tokens, token economics, and cycles, which I don't have time to go into. But long story short, any users can also buy IC or OpenChat tokens, which can be converted into cycles, and will also potentially be gifting tokens to early adopters. So users can have cycles of wallets with cycles, a balance of cycles. In this case, Matt's got 10 trillion cycles. I'm going to send a couple of T cycles to Alice, but you kind of get the idea. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks for that.
Jay Yang and Clarence Liu are joining us today to talk about Tassin, a decentralized crypto exchange that has raised $1.3 million to build out its product. Welcome, Jay and Clarence.
Hi.
Tell us, what is your product and who is it for?
So Tacen is a no KYC non-custodial exchange. We're launching it in US. It solves a lot of problems that are in centralized exchanges, solves a lot of problems in decentralized exchanges. And what we're trying to do is build an exchange where privacy is preserved. We own no data that is of the traders. And then we focus on the core exchange experience by not being distracted by things like, oh, how do we safeguard custody and all of that stuff. Those things are done through code, and we ensure that they are reviewed, audited, and there's a formal verification that we'll do. And by ensuring that the technology is solid, and that ensures the self-custody of the fund, we can then really focus on amping up the speed on the exchange part.
There are other decentralized exchanges out there, like Uniswap, for example. How is Tassin different from what currently exists?
I'd say Uniswap solves a lot of problems for many DeFi projects and many of the projects on Ethereum. It provides a really good model, but I think there are some duct tapes there that can be replaced. Like duct tape, what I mean by that is automated market makers, and they needed to have that because they couldn't get sufficient liquidity to make the decentralized exchange process work. The way that Tassin is different is that because we provide an ample tool that is similar to what centralized exchanges offer, that providing liquidity does not require you to dump a lot of money into these AMMs. You can just change the order at the fastest speed possible to have a dynamic hedging. So I think that's the main difference between Uniswap and Tassin.
Tell me about the fundraising experience. You have raised $1.3 million so far. How much more capital do you need to get this off the ground?
So our seed raise is targeting $2.5 million that we feel is the minimal needed to accelerate our growth. However, we actually have a planned private sale for another $9 to $10 million. And the reason why we need that is because our smart wallet is connecting to multiple chains. Currently, we're on Ethereum, RSK, and Tron, a few others. But in order to really horizontally scale that out, we need to be able to connect to far more chains, such as Algorand, Hedera, Moonbeam on Polkadot, you name it. So all those integrations take a lot of money. And also being a legally compliant exchange in the US, we have far more legal hurdles to keep up with. And things that we're doing, like joining the Blockchain Association and being part of the ongoing scene, the regulatory scene, are all pretty expensive. I know, CZ from Binance needed $10 million to start. He did very well. I think we'll need just the same, as even probably more, because we're actually trying to use the most leading technologies, such as DFINITY in our architecture.
With any early stage company, hiring the wrong person can kill your startup. As an early stage DeFi company, who do you hire first? A lawyer or an engineer?
So hiring by function, I'm not so worried about. I think it's my interviewing, I'm embarrassed to say, my interviewing process is very straightforward. I talk to them for 30 minutes. I tell them what I'm building, and it's either they're interested or they're not.
Robinhood has been under scrutiny from regulators and users alike. Recent issues have ranged from platform outages to selling order information to high-frequency traders to backlash for restricting trading of certain stocks like GameStop. As founders of a decentralized exchange, what do you think Robinhood could have done better?
So one thing that as a centralized exchanges have, they have some limitations. If it is a technical problem, then they could have anticipated this demand. They could have architected a little differently, more robustly, so that when there's a lot of people trying to submit order, then there are ways to handle this a little more gracefully.
And fundamentally, too, decentralized exchanges don't have that problem, right? A lot of decentralized components are actually running on, say, the DFINITY Internet Computer or on decentralized blockchains, those are pretty much always up. So if you architect around more decentralized components, then you offload that to a really resilient system, because blockchains aren't just running one exchange, they're running the whole internet computer or a ton of different apps, and they all have to run.
In Robinhood's case, if you don't have access to the app, then you don't have access to your account. And that's a big problem, right? So you can't, send more money in or take your money out. You can't even command it to do simple stuff like that, let alone trade. So in a decentralized exchanges case, you certainly have control over your wallet and what you do with it. So you already have custody, and you don't have to worry about what happens when, quote unquote, whatever is hosting that website goes down. You can actually do what you need to do.
And it's not to say Tassin is infallible, like any sort of centralized exchange could potentially go down. But in Tassin's case, we have a built-in 2-day timer where if your smart wallet can't connect to exchange, and for some unknown reason, there's a big fire, explosion, who knows what could happen to a centralized exchange, you always have custody of your funds, and in 2 days, you'll get all your funds back. So there's no risk of losing funds on Tassin and similar other exchanges as well.
What is on the product roadmap for Tassin in 2021?
We want to first audit all of our open source code that we're going to release around starting third week of April, first week of May time period. And around the same time, we'll integrate a large portion of our infrastructure code into the internet computer. It really speeds up our pace of development. Then around June, July time period, I want to say, we'll do a closed beta. Then we'll move on to open beta in August, September time period. Then we will launch the exchange soon after. And that's going to be the crypto-to-crypto exchange, no KYC, no custody. Then beyond, great things after that, to 2022.
Jay, Clarence, thank you for joining us. We'll be rooting for you as Tassin continues to grow.
Thank you so much, guys.
If you've tuned in to DFINITY milestone launch events or followed the internet computer in the news, you may have heard of LinkedUp. LinkedUp is one of the first proofs of concept for how an application could run on the internet computer. LinkedUp has existed as a demonstration of an open social network similar to Microsoft-owned LinkedIn. I'm excited to introduce Andra and Vidor from the team that has taken over the LinkedUp project and intends to build it out as an identity management platform.
Thank you, Anna, for that lovely introduction.
Andra and Vidor, you are taking the open source technology that DFINITY internally developed on the internet computer, and you intend to bring a new application to market. Tell us about your process of turning the open source code into a startup.
Yeah, so we've been watching DFINITY for a couple of years now, and we're big fans of the project. So when the opportunity arose to take over the development of the LinkedUp platform, we were really, really excited to grow this project. The idea actually originated at Dokia Capital. I'm part of the team there. But since then, it branched out into its own standalone project, and that happened when our CEO decided to fund it and set up a dedicated team that would, develop and grow the platform. So we have an initial funding of $500,000 and some other soft commitments, but we're not really interested in fundraising right now. We want to develop an MVP and launch it, and that's our main focus.
We are doing some R&D work as well as some visionary work, because building a social network is never only building a social network. It's a question of identity. And that's how we plan to position this product.
Microsoft bought LinkedIn for $26 billion. And LinkedIn has reported that it sees 260 million monthly active users. So those are both pretty big numbers. tell us, what is wrong with LinkedIn and why do we need a decentralized version of a professional social network?
What's wrong with LinkedIn is basically, if you look at the core of the issue, what's wrong with all social media networks right now. There's obviously data issue, privacy issues. We have a lot of misinformation. We have deplatforming going on. It's an ongoing conversation. And it all sums up to the fact that they're centralized and built on these proprietary systems. There's a need for a platform like LinkedUp. We need to enjoy social media. There's not a problem with the social networks themselves. We need a place to showcase our talents, to talk about our achievements. There's a lot of positive things that a professional social media network can do for the world, but we don't need to pay for all those benefits with our data and our privacy. We can actually have them, enjoy them, and have the dignity of owning our data and the power of controlling those platforms.
So how exactly does LinkedUp take advantage of self-sovereign identity?
The concept of self-sovereign identity, when we skip the long part of it, basically boils down to users owning their own data, not big tech. The most important thing is that users can choose what they wish to disclose. Do they wish to disclose all their data or only a select subset of data?
And we definitely see LinkedUp becoming an identity provider. So you could use your LinkedUp account to sign into other third-party platforms built on the internet computer, and it should work seamlessly.
Audio app Clubhouse is a rare new example of a social network that quickly amassed 8 million global downloads and a $1 billion valuation, despite still being in this pre-launch invite-only mode. So this tells us that there's a huge appetite for new social media products. And we know from these examples that a social media product is only as good as its users are engaged. So how would you think about growing the LinkedUp user base?
When you kickstart the network, so you definitely need those few hundred, 1,000, even more users that are big fans. They offer feedback, they engage a lot, they're super valuable, and they definitely play a role in how you will choose to position this platform in the future, But once you do kickstart that network effect and you start getting mass adopted, the platform has to change and morph because it has to accommodate a wider array of people that have different needs. So we're pretty confident that the features and the functionalities that we start up with won't be the ones that we end up with, and it's an iterative process. We're looking forward to the day where we go a bit more broad, even though we're thinking it very narrow right now. And we can, be the place where different communities form, because that is a human-centered design when you can accommodate very different communities and they all feel served well by those same features and functionalities. That's the ultimate goal here.
One of the ways that social networks like Instagram and TikTok grow is with discovery and explore features. A lot of these networks, the reason that they work and they're successful is because they manipulate user data. They know what users are interested in and they're able to suggest content and topics. So you're saying that something like that could work on a decentralized social network, yet not gather user data. So then how exactly is that network powered?
Well, probably by empowering the users and asking them to accurately, tag and label and, define the content that they're posting and tell us if they want that content to be into the explore page. So it's basically a trade-off, as with anything. You won't get that intuitive explore page that you're used to in a centralized social network. You do need to put a bit of more effort into helping the community curate that explore page without exploiting their data.
Decentralized social media is an obvious first target for organized hate on the internet. How are you thinking about community moderation for decentralized social?
Yeah, so that's definitely the challenge going forward for any social media platform that wants to decentralize. We don't want to end up like Parler, so we don't want to be a place that, nurtures hate speech and other really problematic things. But at the same time, we don't want to censor or deplatform our users in any way. So going forward, the race is actually towards developing powerful tools so that the community can moderate the content themselves in a positive and constructive way. We need to nurture a positive environment, and the tools that we build should guide the community in the right direction instead of enforcing our views of what's right and what's wrong.
Andrea and Vidor, thanks so much for joining us for this event. We're really excited to follow the progress of LinkedUp.
Thank you so much for having us, Anna.
Thank you.
We're excited to welcome Olaf Carlson-Wee, who is the founder and CIO of Polychain Capital, as well as Tacen Salimi, who is a general partner at Polychain Capital.
Hey, Anna, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Anna.
So my first question is something that I think a lot of founders probably have on their mind as a first step to understanding how to pitch their open internet company to a venture capitalist. How does a pitch deck for a company building on the open internet differ from a traditional startup's pitch deck?
So I think for any founder that's thinking through how to structure their pitch deck for an open web startup or a DAO, which I'll use synonymously with open web startup in this conversation, a lot of the same elements are going to appear in the pitch deck as would in a traditional startup company. So in any case, investors are going to want to know the core thesis behind the project, a description of the product, who the team is behind the product, some analysis of the market size. And I think all of that will be kind of consistent across the two. Where things start to really differ is around kind of the financial or economic slides, as well as user growth strategy. So one way to think of this is in the Web 2 world or the traditional startup world, a pitch deck would sell kind of what the lifetime value of a customer would be, or its LTV. It'll look at stats like the cost of user acquisition and kind of go to these basic business metrics to understand what are the unit economics of this business. Broadly, what's being done here is you're trying to convince investors that the ability to develop these network effects in your company are effective. And when you develop these network effects, you're actually going to monetize those effectively as a business. The typical VC model is companies raise a lot of VC money and then effectively give it away to early users as a way to subsidize those users to come onto this network. You can see this in many forms, such as referral fees to users, customer credits, discounts. Sometimes companies even give users cash directly. You could see that in the case of neobanks and fintech businesses. Now, flipping that to open web companies, you still have the same broad goal of developing network effects. But the interesting thing here is you actually don't need to give away VC money to incent users to a new platform. You can actually build a system which rewards and incentivizes early users in the protocol or DAO itself. And you do this through a crypto mechanism called liquidity mining. Early users that come to a new platform earn a form of equity in that platform. Imagine an eBay protocol where buyers and sellers, upon the completion of each transaction, actually mine a small amount of eBay equity. Or you can think of an Uber protocol where drivers mine equity after each ride is complete. One element where you think of this in the pitch deck is instead of convincing investors of a financial model, you're actually trying to convince them of a whole economic system that will drive value to all participants that come on board.
Where do you look when sourcing companies? Do you take warm and cold intros or look at accelerators, Twitter?
Sourcing in early stage venture is definitely more of an art than a science, I would say. It's a patchwork process of participating inside these early stage crypto communities, talking to entrepreneurs that we know, talking to developers that we know who are building a lot of these software systems, and really just cobbling together all that information to try to come up with a vision of the future and figure out who's building that.
In a post-COVID world, we obviously would previously spend a lot of time at technical conferences in the crypto and broader tech industry. It was a great way to meet founders and early companies. Having to adapt to travel restrictions, we do spend a lot of time in kind of community channels on Discord, community channels on Telegram, using Twitter as a way to source new projects. We actually recently funded a seed stage company called Capsule that we discovered through a tweet.
What's the biggest mistake a founder could make when pitching to a crypto fund?
I think a big mistake is not adequately explaining how the system works. So saying, for example, I want to build a social media application on a blockchain, that might sound great, but the question is, how does it work? And really diving into those detailed mechanics about how you prevent spam, how you incentivize moderation. If you don't adequately explain how the system works, ideas are easy to come up with. It's very hard to execute them properly. So I think in specifically open web services, it's important to have a very detailed description of the mechanisms that allow the application to work properly.
When you go to a Y Combinator demo day, you'll notice that every single pitch deck has a slide about the company's total addressable market. Some blockchain projects have the potential to completely upend the architecture of the internet and redesign networks and business models that are not hindered by demographics or geography. How should open internet founders explain TAM?
I think a great historical example here is when you look at applications like Uber or Airbnb, it was easy in the early days to say the TAM of Uber is the largest taxi company, or the TAM of Airbnb is the largest hotel business. But in fact, that was massively underestimating the true size of that market. Because those businesses enabled new behaviors that were sort of unprecedented, they actually expanded the size of the market as we know it today.
Smart venture deals are mutually beneficial for the VC and the startup. When closing a deal with an investor, the size of the check is not the only thing on an entrepreneur's mind. Before making a deal, founders assess how well the VC can guide them on company building and what doors to industry connections the investor may be able to open for them. So when structuring out the cap table, should a blockchain startup seek funding from a variety of traditional and institutional and blockchain investors, or should they only seek funding from the VCs that specialize in blockchain?
If you are an early stage founder in crypto, you absolutely need to partner with crypto people. A lot of generalist venture capital groups are interested in this area, but simply lack the expertise, lack the network of people in this area, don't understand the market dynamics, and don't understand the desires of the end users. Especially the earlier you are, the more important it is to partner with people who deeply understand crypto market dynamics, the average desire of the end crypto user. It's a little bit like biotech, perhaps, in that way. You don't see a lot of generalist venture groups doing crypto with, say, 10% of the capital in a generalist fund.
In efforts to scale fast, startups are known to deploy large portions of capital into sales, marketing, and customer acquisition early on. Have you observed that capital deployment priorities are different for the open internet startups that you back?
One of the big differences is that you can programmatically with code sort of, codify in a very formal manner your customer acquisition incentives in an open internet startup. Tacen mentioned earlier this concept of liquidity mining, whereby an open internet service effectively gives up ownership units of the service in exchange for user acquisition. This is a pretty common pattern in the launch of these open internet services, where they incentivize users with ownership units of the open internet service in exchange for adding liquidity to the platform or using the platform in some capacity. This is a little different than the kind of social media marketing or growth hacking that you would see in a more typical Web 2.0 startup, but it's conceptually similar. The economics are similar. However, you can execute it in a much more scalable way with code, rather than having to sort of go out on a day-to-day basis and run sort of a consumer acquisition marketing campaign.
For seed stage companies, hiring the wrong person can kill your startup. How do you advise your portfolio in making their first hires?
Every hire you make in an early stage startup is going to go out and hire 5 more people. So early hires have a lot of leverage on what the sort of culture and makeup of that organization looks like. This means that hiring a really, really good person will be amplified with the people that from their network that they bring into the business. Early hires in startups are very, very hard, and you have to get it 100% right. There's actually no easy answer there. The main thing is that even if you are under crushing stress and an insane amount of work, you cannot cut corners there. Regardless of if it's a good outcome or a bad outcome, it will be amplified massively as the company grows. So even if you are under, working way too long of hours and working really hard as an early stage founder, this is one area that you genuinely cannot cut corners. You have to find the right early people. At that point, those people will help you find the next 10, so to speak. But those first 3 or 4 hires, they really are going to be sort of the cultural paradigm and attitude of the entire future of the business.
When it comes to the co-founder dynamic too, would you rather invest in a super technical product CEO or maybe a veteran company builder CEO who's exited a company before, or kind of a mix of those two things, like a co-founder duo?
Yeah, we like hardcore product architects, engineers, protocol designers, more than your veritable MBAs. We would much rather have businesses run by product architects than business people.
I want to talk about one topic that's likely on the top of every entrepreneur's mind: the exit. So in Silicon Valley, tech CEOs are idolized. We write books and movies about the founders who started billion-dollar companies from their garage in Palo Alto or their dorm room at Harvard. The narrative arc follows fundraising and all the drama of company building through the moment that a CEO rings the bell at the public debut. Exits in crypto have been rare so far, and crypto companies have a much higher likelihood of seeing liquidity before traditional startups do. We understand a startup's life cycle as launching with TechCrunch coverage, raising 4 rounds of capital, buying office space in San Francisco, and expanding until they sell to Google or take the company public. How does the concept of liquidity translate to decentralized startups? So can blockchain founders dream of the fame and fortune akin to that of Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, or Travis Kalanick? How is the story of the exit different in the crypto sector?
We see the fastest growth in crypto to kind of these billion-dollar valuations for applications that we've ever seen in the world. And individual developers in the crypto space have the most leverage to create value and build things that any developer in any category has ever had. So I think the mechanics are quite different. in that the logic of crypto is that you have to give away what you've created in order to make it valuable. If one person owned all the Bitcoins, Bitcoin would not be valuable at all. This is quite different than, for example, Amazon, where suppose Jeff Bezos owned 100% of Amazon, it would actually be very similarly valuable. And the service for the end user would not be different, right? In the case of open web services, the sort of ownership structure is intricately woven with the product experience itself, and the continued development of that product experience. So the irony of crypto is that the more you give away, sort of the better of an outcome you will have. There's also this concept in crypto of this sort of anonymous founder. People can create open web services and never really reveal their identities and still have that web service be hugely successful. So that's obviously a massive divergence from the sort of attention from the media that more traditional startup founders may receive. But these are all of the different idiosyncrasies of the crypto space that give founders super high leverage, but also, alter the dynamics substantially from traditional startups.
One of the magic powers of crypto is obviously you can achieve liquidity very quickly on your system. And sometimes this means that you have something like a DAO that hasn't yet really found product market fit, but is already liquid and trading. DAOs are obviously much smaller on a market cap basis than traditional internet companies. But I think over time, as these platforms continue to grow and they're already liquid, we're going to see interesting new emergent behavior and potentially DAOs merging together. So you can kind of have a form of second liquidity event as an early backer of one of these platforms. So I do believe it'll look a little bit more like traditional web in M&A activity over time.
If a community eventually takes over to govern a decentralized company, how does equity translate back to the developers who built the tech and the entrepreneurs who scaled the company and the investors who believed in them when they led their Series A?
So I think fundamentally, this is kind of a question of understanding the equity value versus the future token value of a new platform being built. And our general conventional thinking on this is that the best approach when building an open internet service is to use the equity of the company and basically the business as a conduit to actually doing the engineering work and building out the platform. But over time, leading up to the launch of the DAO token, all value should ultimately accrue to that DAO token model. And in the future, after that launch, the equity is either entirely dissolved and the business is dissolved, it moves to effectively an internet sovereign corporation, or the equity remains in place and the company still exists, but basically just takes a perfunctory role of updating the UI, UX, managing the code base and pushing updates through, but not really capturing economic value. So I think it's important for investors to understand this is a new paradigm and one that liquidity and exits look a little bit different than traditional web investing. But if done correctly, the tokens of these new platforms can be incredibly valuable.
Is there any lasting advice that you have for entrepreneurs who are building on open internet structure that would make you say, all right, I'm ready to write a check?
Think from first principles about how you could enable a new type of behavior that's sort of unprecedented, but uniquely made possible through the characteristics of one of these open web platforms. Once you have that concept, that is the core first strategic thing you have to do. And the second is basically just build a prototype and see if you can make it crudely work. The whole crypto space is amazing because once you have one of these ideas and you launch it out into the wild, it's sort of out of your hands and it can grow way beyond what you personally are capable of doing. Taking, say, Bitcoin as the classic example, it is way beyond, at this point, the creator's vision or ideas of what it could be. It really became about giving ownership to the community of users who then sort of define what Bitcoin means. So there is this sort of reverse logic. It's not of control and ownership. It's about decentralization and distribution. And the more you can sort of embrace that kind of native Web3 mindset, I think the more successful you'll be as an entrepreneur in this area. Crypto tends to reward radical ideas. And I think there is no limit to the potential of what could be built here. And just in general, I would encourage prospective entrepreneurs to think very big about what is possible. We really have upended the traditional logic of finance and the internet, and it is now possible in a really high leverage way to codify human sort of behavioral and organizational patterns in ways that are totally unprecedented and are sometimes sort of running wild beyond what we ever thought they could be. So I think that, this is the highest leverage time in the world to be a crypto developer. And I do think that crypto developers right now have more leverage than any engineer in any category ever has had. So I think it's a very exciting time, in short, to be a builder here. And I think everyone will be surprised by what is possible 5 years from now.
Olaf, Tacen, thanks so much for joining us. This has been really fascinating and I'm sure very informative for startups who may be considering building their technology on an open internet infrastructure or who are already there and looking to fundraise. So thanks so much, and we're excited to follow the success of the Polychain portfolio.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for joining us for exploring entrepreneurship in the open internet boom. Today, we heard from DFINITY's Dominic Williams and TechCrunch's Mike Butcher on the progress of the internet computer and how entrepreneurship is fundamentally changing in the open internet boom. Investors at Polychain Capital talked about how an open internet startup's pitch deck is different from the pitches you might see at a Y Combinator demo day. Lastly, we met Capsule, Fleek, Tassin, and LinkedUp, 4 startups exploring building on the internet computer and pioneering entrepreneurship on the open internet. If you want to revisit any advice you heard today, you can find the full show as well as the individual panels on DFINITY's YouTube channel. We hope these conversations will kickstart even more discussion about how the internet computer can be leveraged in this new wave of entrepreneurship.